A tense negotiation followed, with Eva leveraging the importance of the diplomatic materials to secure immediate protections for Kalen's people. By the time communication ended, the ambassador had agreed to a carefully structured intervention. Galactic enforcement would secure Novacorp facilities and personnel while maintaining minimal contact with Viridia's indigenous population until formal diplomatic relations could be established. As the projection faded, Vareth turned to Eva. "You bargain well for our interests," she observed, "even when your freedom at stake." "We're partners," Eva replied simply, glancing at Kalen. "That means your interests are my interests now." The following days brought rapid change to Viridia. Galactic enforcement vessels established an orbital perimeter, effectively quarantining the planet against unauthorized traffic, while ground forces secured Novacorp facilities. The corporation's personnel were detained for questioning, their operations shut down pending full investigation. Eva worked closely with both Kalen's people and the intervention forces, serving as intermediary to ensure the indigenous population's rights remained central to all decisions. The diplomatic cargo was eventually recovered from her ship's wreckage, sealed containers that Eva still never learned the contents of, though their importance was evident in the security surrounding their retrieval. With Novacorp neutralized and galactic protection established, the settlement's atmosphere transformed. Generations of constant vigilance eased into cautious optimism as Kalen's people began considering possibilities that had been unthinkable mere weeks before. 1 week after the initial intervention, Eva received a private communication from the diplomatic corps. They requested her presence on the orbiting command vessel to discuss her extraction and debriefing. The message carried the unstated but clear expectation that her time on Viridia was concluding. Eva found Kalen at the edge of the settlement, where he was instructing younger members of his community in the use of communication technology provided by the intervention forces. The easy competence with which he navigated between traditional knowledge and new technology reinforced Eva's growing admiration for his adaptability. "They want me to leave," she said without preamble when his lesson concluded. "Standard debriefing. Probably some minor penalties for transporting unmarked diplomatic materials, then release with compensation for my destroyed ship." Kalen absorbed this information with characteristic stillness. "You will go?" he asked finally, his tone carefully neutral. Eva gazed out at Viridia's jungle, the world that had nearly killed her, then shown her purpose beyond mere survival. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing for me out there except another ship, another cargo, another solo run through contested space." "And here," Kalen prompted. There's... Eva hesitated, unaccustomed to articulating such thoughts. There's meaning, connection, a chance to build something rather than just transport other people's goods." Kalen moved closer, his presence now familiar and essential in ways Eva hadn't anticipated when they first encountered each other. "So stay," he said simply. "Help us navigate new relationship with Galaxy. Be bridge between worlds." "It wouldn't be easy," Eva warned. "I'm not exactly diplomat material. I've spent my career avoiding entanglements, not creating them." "Nothing worth doing is easy," Kalen observed. "But nothing worth having comes from running away." The truth of his words resonated with something long dormant in Eva, a capacity for commitment she had deliberately suppressed after too many betrayals in both military and civilian life. "If I stayed," she said slowly, "what exactly would I be staying for? To be an advisor? A cultural interpreter?" Kalen's expression shifted to something more personal, more vulnerable than his usual composed demeanor. "Those things, yes. But also..." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that bridged their physiological differences. "Also this, whatever this becomes." The contact sent warmth through Eva's body, not just physical attraction, though that element existed increasingly between them, but a deeper recognition of compatibility that transcended species barriers. They had moved from enemies to allies to partners by necessity. What they might become by choice remained an unwritten path. "I've never been good at staying," Eva said honestly, "but I've never had a reason worth staying for before." First time for everything, Kalen replied, a hint of his rarely shown humor surfacing. Eva made her decision standing there at the settlement's edge, Viridia's complex ecosystem surrounding them with its vibrant life. When she boarded the shuttle to the orbiting diplomatic vessel the next day, it was not as a departing survivor, but as an appointed representative of Viridia's indigenous population, a position hastily but officially recognized by the Intervention Command. The debriefing was extensive, as Eva had expected. Her role in the NovaCorp exposure was documented in detail, her transportation of unmarked diplomatic materials addressed with surprising leniency given the circumstances. The compensation for her destroyed ship was processed and transferred to her accounts, funds that would now contribute to Viridia's controlled technological development rather than purchasing another transport vessel. When Eva returned to the surface, she brought with her preliminary treaties for Vareth and the other elders to consider, the first steps toward formal recognition of Viridia as a protected indigenous world with limited, regulated contact with the wider galactic community. The documents acknowledge the ancestral claim of Kalen's people while establishing frameworks for gradual integration of selected technologies and knowledge exchange. Kalen waited at the shuttle landing site, his powerful form outlined against the jungle backdrop. As Eva descended the ramp, datapad containing the treaty drafts in hand, she was struck by how thoroughly her life had transformed in the span of mere weeks. From isolated transport captain to diplomat, from crash survivor to community member, from solitary operator to whatever she and Kalen were becoming. "Welcome back," he said simply, though his expression conveyed far more than the word alone. "I told them I'm staying," Eva replied, officially, as Viridia's human liaison. Unofficially, she stepped closer, deliberately invading the personal space that had once been tense territory between them. Unofficially for this, she gestured to the settlement, to the jungle, to Kalen himself, encompassing all that had become precious to her on this world that had nearly claimed her life. Kalen's response was to reach out and trace the now-healed scar from the thorn that had first brought them together. "From I'll pounce if you keep looking," he said, recalling their first interaction, to "I'll stay if you keep asking." Eva smiled, a genuine expression that felt increasingly natural on her face. "The thorn's out," she agreed, "but I'm still looking, and I think I like what I see." 6 months later, Eva stood on a newly constructed observation platform overlooking the valley where her ship had crashed. The wreckage had been largely reclaimed by Viridia's aggressive vegetation, with only hints of metal and composite materials visible among the green growth. The transformation mirrored the broader changes across the planet, with NovaCorp's operations dismantled and restitution payments flowing into indigenous development funds. Kalen's people had begun selective integration of beneficial technologies while maintaining their deep connection to Viridia's ecology. The ancestral ship remained active, its energy beacon still pulsing skyward with unwavering purpose. No response had yet been detected from others of Kalen's species among the stars, but the possibility remained, a hope rather than an expectation. Eva's role had evolved from emergency diplomat to established advisor, helping navigate the complex interactions between Viridia's people and the wider galactic community. She had learned their language, adapted to their customs, found her place within their social structures without abandoning her human identity. And Kalen had become her partner in every sense of the word. Their relationship had developed despite physiological differences and occasional cultural misunderstandings, growing into something neither had experienced before, a connection that honored both their shared experiences and their distinct perspectives. He joined her now on the platform, moving with the silent grace that still occasionally startled her when her attention was elsewhere. "Remembering the crash?" he asked, standing close enough that their arms touched lightly. "Remembering how it all began?" Eva corrected. "The worst day of my life that somehow led to the best decision I've ever made." Kalen followed her gaze to the overgrown wreckage. "You still miss space sometimes," he observed. It wasn't a question, but a recognition of something he had come to understand about her. "Sometimes," Eva admitted. "The freedom of it. The solitude." She turned to face him directly. "But I found something better than freedom here. something I never had out there among the stars. What? He asked, though his expression suggested he already knew her answer. Belonging, Eva said simply. A home. A purpose beyond the next contract. In the valley below, several of Viridia's younger generation were receiving instruction from both tribal elders and galactic education specialists. Part of the carefully balanced knowledge exchange program Eva had helped establish. The future unfolding before them would combine ancient wisdom with new possibilities, traditional values with selected innovations. The Galactic Council has approved the permanent protection status, Eva informed him, sharing the news she had received that morning. Viridia is officially recognized as an indigenous heritage world with autonomous governance rights. Kalen nodded with satisfaction. Good outcome from bad beginning. Very philosopher of you, Eva teased, leaning against his solid presence. His arm encircled her shoulders in a gesture that had become natural between them. Learned from best human philosopher, pilot, crash, survivor, diplomat. He returned, his command of standard galactic now fluid enough for gentle humor. As afternoon light filtered through Viridia's canopy, casting those familiar emerald patterns across the landscape, Eva reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment of violent impact that had begun her Viridia experience to this peaceful overlook beside someone who had once been a potential threat, her life had transformed in ways no navigational computer could have plotted. The thorn had long since been removed, but its mark remained, a small scar on her arm that served as a reminder of their beginning. From mutual suspicion to shared purpose to this unnamed but undeniable bond, they had forged something neither civilization had quite anticipated in their first contact protocols. If I had to crash again, Eva said, I'd choose Viridia every time. Kalen's expression softened into the smile he reserved only for her. If you crash again, I'll find you. Pull out thorns, carry you through jungle, and I'll reconfigure your ancient technology and negotiate with bureaucrats. Eva completed. That's what partners do. As they descended from the platform to rejoin the settlement, Eva glanced once more at the crash site where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. The Wanderer had made her final journey, but Captain Eva Rostova was still wandering in her way, exploring not distant star systems now, but the equally vast territories of belonging, commitment, and connection. Here, on Viridia, amid a people not her own who had nonetheless become her people, she had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures began not with a launch sequence, but with a crash landing. And sometimes the most valuable cargo wasn't what you were transporting, but who you became while carrying it. The thorns had been removed, and what remained was something neither had expected to find in Viridia's dangerous beauty, a shared path forward, forged in crisis, tested in conflict, and now walked by choice under the emerald light of their adopted home. Eva considered this new information. If we could access those records, broadcast them along with evidence of NovaCorp's activities, we could force a galactic protectorate intervention. They'd have to send investigators, maybe even a military response. Kalen's eyes gleamed with new purpose as he translated Eva's words for Vareth. The elder nodded slowly, then spoke again. Vareth agrees, Kalen relayed. Says this is what we need. Evidence to call Sky People. In NovaCorp forever. The modified beacon, Eva said, thinking aloud. With the amplified signal strength from your ancestral technology, we could potentially broadcast directly to galactic enforcement channels. But we need to access your ancestral ship first, retrieve the historical records, and combine them with evidence of NovaCorp's current activities. Kalen nodded his understanding. He consulted with Vareth again before responding. Dangerous mission. NovaCorp guards ship heavily. Many soldiers advance weapons. We'll need a better plan than our last one, Eva agreed. And more people. Your warriors, combined with the element of surprise, might give us a chance. As Kalen translated this, other members of his species gathered around, listening intently. Eva noticed their expressions changing as they understood the proposal. Fear mingling with determination, hope with remembered pain. These were not naturally warlike beings, but NovaCorp had given them ample reason to fight. Vareth spoke again, this time addressing the gathered group rather than just Eva and Kalen. Her words seemed to resonate deeply, drawing nods of agreement and expressions of resolve. She calls for volunteers, Kalen explained. Warriors willing to fight for our future. Many stepped forward immediately, including several of those just rescued from the research facility. Eva was struck by their courage. To face returning to captivity for even the possibility of freedom required extraordinary bravery. With Veritha's blessing, they moved to a central gathering area where Eva could better explain her developing strategy. Using the transport's projection system and Kalen's translation, she outlined what they knew of Nova Corp's operation and the location of the ancestral ship. Our advantage is that Nova Corp doesn't know we're targeting the ship, Eva explained. They'll be focused on recovering their research subjects and eliminating witnesses. We can use that expectation against them. The plan took shape over hours of discussion. They would create multiple diversions across Nova Corp's facilities, stretching their security forces thin. Meanwhile, a small, elite team, including Eva and Kalen, would infiltrate the ancestral ship site, retrieve the historical records, and transmit them along with evidence of Nova Corp's illegal activities directly to galactic enforcement channels. The preparations consumed the next 2 days. Eva worked continuously on the modified beacon, integrating additional components salvaged from the transport and the indigenous technology Kalen provided. The rescued captives shared critical intelligence about Nova Corp's facilities and operations, guard rotations, access protocols, communication frequencies. Kalen selected his best warriors for the mission, training them to use the Nova Corp weapons they had captured. Eva was impressed by their adaptability. Despite generations removed from technological society, they grasped concepts quickly, their intuitive understanding of tactical principles compensating for their lack of formal training. Meanwhile, Eva found herself growing increasingly integrated into the community. What had begun as professional cooperation evolved into something deeper. Genuine respect, shared purpose, and a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her early military days, before disillusionment had driven her to independent transport work. On the eve of their mission, as final preparations were being made, Kalen found Eva making adjustments to her weapon system on the outskirts of the settlement. He approached quietly, observing her work for a moment before speaking. "Tomorrow dangerous," he said simply. Eva nodded, not looking up from her task. "Very, but necessary." Kalen settled beside her, his presence comfortable rather than intrusive. After a moment of silence, he spoke again, his standard galactic more fluid after days of intensive exchange. "Why help us? Could have activated beacon for rescue. Left Viridia." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. Eva considered it carefully before responding. At first, it was self-preservation, she admitted. Nova Corp wanted me dead. Helping you meant helping myself. She paused, setting aside her equipment. But now, it's more than that. More how? Kalen prompted when she didn't continue. Eva struggled to articulate feelings she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. "I've spent years just surviving, taking contracts, delivering cargo, not asking questions about what I was transporting or who it might harm. Staying detached, neutral." She looked up at the canopy, where Viridia's strange constellations were visible through gaps in the foliage. But neutrality just enables the powerful to abuse the vulnerable. What Nova Corp is doing here, it's exactly the kind of operation I've indirectly supported by looking the other way. So, redemption, Kalen suggested, the concept clearly one he understood despite linguistic barriers. Eva shook her head. Maybe partly, but also connection. She looked directly at him now. With you, with your people, with something that matters beyond just my own survival. Kalen held her gaze, his expression thoughtful. Strange, yes? How crash brings enemies together. Makes partners. Partners, Eva repeated, the word carrying greater depth than when they'd first used it. I never expected to find that here, of all places. Kalen's hand moved to cover hers, a deliberate gesture that crossed species barriers. Viridia has power, brings together what belongs together. The touch lingered, warm and unexpectedly comforting. Eva found herself not withdrawing as she normally would, instead allowing this moment of connection before the dangers they would face tomorrow. "Get some rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will test us all." Kalen nodded, rising with his characteristic fluid grace. Until dawn, Eva Rostova. He departed silently, leaving Eva with thoughts both unsettled and strangely peaceful. Dawn on Viridia brought a spectacle of light as the rising sun interacted with the planet's unique atmosphere, casting the jungle in hues of amber and rose. Eva observed it from the settlement's perimeter, mentally reviewing their plan while performing a final check of her equipment. Kalen approached, accompanied by the warriors selected for their mission. 8 of his people, including 2 who had been held in the research facility and knew its current layout. All were armed with a combination of Novacorp weapons and traditional hunting tools. "Teams ready," Kalen reported. "Diversions begin at midday." Eva nodded. "Good. We move toward the ship site now. Get into position while Novacorp's attention is still focused on finding the settlement." They departed shortly after, Eva and Kalen leading the small force through jungle paths so subtle that Eva could barely discern them. Their progress was necessarily slow. Stealth mattered more than speed at this stage. According to their intelligence, the ancestral ship was housed within a specialized Novacorp research facility approximately 15 kilometers from the hidden settlement. As they traveled, Eva observed how naturally Kalen's people moved through the dense undergrowth, not just physically adapted to the environment, but spiritually connected to it. They communicated using subtle sounds that mimicked natural jungle noises, coordinating their movements with minimal visibility. By midday, they had reached an observation position overlooking the facility containing the ancestral ship. From their vantage point, Eva could see the Novacorp operation was more substantial than she had anticipated, a heavily fortified compound with energy barriers, automated defense systems, and regular security patrols. At the center stood a massive excavation site, partially covered by a retractable roof. This would be where the ancestral ship was housed, protected from both the elements and orbital surveillance. "No wonder they guard it so carefully," Eva murmured. "The technology in that ship could be worth billions on the open market, not to mention its military applications." Kalen nodded grimly. "Our heritage, our history. They steal it like everything else." Eva checked her chronometer. The diversions should be starting any moment. Watch for security response patterns. Right on schedule, alarms began blaring across the Novacorp complex. Emergency responses activated as reports came in of attacks on their outlying facilities, the other teams executing their part of the plan with perfect timing. They watched as security forces mobilized, deploying vehicles and personnel toward the reported incidents. The protection around the ship facility thinned noticeably, though it remained substantial. "Now comes the hard part," Eva said, surveying the remaining defenses. "Getting inside without triggering the automated systems." Kalen indicated one of his team, a female whose mottled fur pattern was particularly effective camouflage, heavily reinforced, evidence of the sensitive nature of what this structure contained. Lyrith oriented herself, then pointed toward what internal schematics identified as the central excavation chamber. "Ship there," she whispered. "Many guards always." Eva checked her weapon. "We'll need to be fast and decisive. No lethal force unless absolutely necessary. We want evidence of Novacorp's crimes, not create our own." The team advanced through the facility, using service corridors to avoid the main halls where security would be concentrated. They encountered minimal resistance. Most personnel were still responding to the diversionary attacks, but each checkpoint required careful navigation and occasional use of the captured access credentials. As they approached the central chamber, the scale of Novacorp's operation became apparent. Research stations lined the approach corridors, each dedicated to analyzing different aspects of the ancestral technology. Eva glimpsed components similar to what Kalen had provided for the beacon modification, though these were being systematically disassembled and reverse-engineered rather than respected as cultural artifacts. The central chamber itself was massive, a cavernous space excavated deep into Viridia's crust, reinforced with structural supports and environmental controls. And at its center, partially buried but unmistakably artificial, was the ancestral ship. Even after generations of earth and vegetation had reclaimed much of its structure, the vessel's design was breathtaking, sleek, organic curves integrated with crystalline components that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. It resembled no spacecraft Eva had encountered in her extensive travels, suggesting technology that had developed along an entirely different evolutionary path from mainstream galactic engineering. Kalen and his team stopped at the threshold, momentarily overwhelmed by the sight of their heritage made tangible. Generations of oral history had preserved the knowledge of their origins, but seeing the physical reality clearly affected them deeply. "Our ancestors came in this," Kalen said softly, reverence evident in his tone. "Crossed stars to find Viridia." Eva allowed them this moment of connection, but kept her focus on the tactical situation. The chamber contained several NovaCorp researchers and a reduced security detail, fewer than normal due to the ongoing diversions, but still dangerous. "The historical records," she whispered to Kalen. "Where would they be located?" Lyrith pointed to a section of the ship that remained relatively intact. What appeared to be a command center or information repository. "Records there. NovaCorp tries to access. Many years already. Some success only. That's our target," Eva decided. "We need to clear a path without raising general alarms." They split into their assigned teams, moving to predetermined positions around the chamber's perimeter. On Eva's signal, the first team created a distraction, a controlled equipment malfunction that drew both researchers and security toward the far side of the excavation. With attention diverted, Eva, Kalen, and Lyrith advanced rapidly to the ship's access point. The entrance was partially obstructed by excavation equipment and temporary research stations, but still accessible. As they approached, Lyrith hesitated, pointing to security measures surrounding the ship's perimeter. "New systems," she warned. "Not here before." Eva scanned the setup quickly, recognizing advanced motion and heat detection grids. NovaCorp's been upgrading. They must have made progress in accessing the ship's systems. Kalen studied the security measures, his expression thoughtful. Then, to Eva's surprise, he stepped directly toward the ship, ignoring the security perimeter entirely. "Kalen, wait," she began, expecting alarms to trigger instantly. Instead, something remarkable happened. As Kalen approached, the ship's surface seemed to respond, subtle illumination patterns shifting beneath the accumulated soil and vegetation, flowing toward his presence like water seeking its level. The security systems remained silent, their sensors apparently unable to detect the activation occurring beneath their monitoring threshold. Kalen turned back to Eva, his expression reflecting both wonder and confirmation of some deep instinct. "Ship knows its people," he said simply. Eva followed carefully, fascinated to observe that the ship responded differently to her approach, the illumination patterns becoming more cautious, evaluative. It didn't reject her presence, but clearly distinguished between Kalen's genetic heritage and her human biology. They reached the partially excavated entrance without triggering any alarms. The ship's internal space had been extensively studied by NovaCorp researchers, with equipment and cables connected to various systems. Despite this invasive examination, the vessel retained an aura of ancient power, dormant but not dead. Lyrith led them to the command center, where NovaCorp had established an elaborate research station dedicated to accessing the ship's historical and technical records. Holographic interfaces displayed partial translations and data extractions, evidence of considerable progress in breaching the ancestral security systems. "They've been methodical," Eva observed, examining the setup. "Years of work here." Kalen moved to what appeared to be the primary interface, a crystalline console that pulsed with subdued light. As with the exterior, the system responded to his presence, illumination patterns intensifying and reorganizing. "It recognizes you," Eva said. "Genetic confirmation, perhaps," or some more sophisticated biometric scanning we don't understand. Kalen placed his hand directly on the console's surface. The response was immediate and dramatic, the entire system flaring to life with brilliant illumination that momentarily blinded them. When Eva's vision cleared, she saw holographic displays activating throughout the chamber, showing star charts, navigational records, and what appeared to be historical documentation. "It's giving you access," she breathed. "Complete access, not just the partial connections NovaCorp achieved." Lirith moved quickly to a research terminal, interfacing with the NovaCorp equipment to begin downloading the activated records. "Must hurry," she warned. "Security will see power changes." Eva unpacked the modified beacon, preparing it to transmit directly to galactic enforcement channels. The beacon's design had been extensively enhanced using components from both NovaCorp technology and the ancestral ship pieces Kalen had provided earlier. "We need the origin records," Eva directed. "Anything establishing your people's arrival timeline and right to claim indigenous status under galactic law." Kalen seemed to communicate directly with the ship's systems. Whether through some technological interface or a more intuitive connection wasn't clear. The holographic displays shifted in response, focusing on specific historical archives that documented the arrival of his ancestors on Viridia. The records were stunning in their detail and preservation. They showed a spacefaring civilization that had deliberately chosen Viridia as a sanctuary world, escaping some unspecified conflict or cataclysm that had threatened their original home system. They had arrived centuries before human expansion into this sector, establishing clear chronological precedents for indigenous rights claims. "This is perfect," Eva said, connecting the beacon to Lirith's terminal to accumulate the evidence. Combined with documentation of NovaCorp's current activities, this creates an ironclad case for galactic protectorate intervention. As they worked, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. The security forces had finally noticed the unauthorized access to the ship's systems. "Time's up," Eva warned, completing the beacon's preparations. "We need to transmit now, even if we don't have everything." Kalen nodded grimly, continuing to interface with the ancestral systems while Eva activated the modified beacon. The device powered up, drawing energy from both its NovaCore power cells and the ancestral technology components. Its transmission capacity had been exponentially enhanced, capable of cutting through Viridia's atmospheric interference to reach galactic enforcement monitoring stations. "The transmission will take approximately 3 minutes to complete," Eva informed Kalen. "We need to hold this position until then." Security forces were already responding to the alarm, converging on the central chamber from multiple access points. Kalen's warriors moved to defensive positions, prepared to delay the NovaCorp personnel without initiating lethal confrontation if possible. The first security team breached the chamber entrance, immediately taking cover and assessing the situation. Their commander, recognizing the unauthorized access to the ship and the transmission in progress, ordered an immediate response. "Intruders at the artifact. They're accessing restricted systems and broadcasting. Shut them down immediately." Energy weapons fire erupted across the chamber as NovaCorp security attempted to disable the transmission equipment. Kalen's warriors responded with precise suppressive fire, creating a defensive perimeter around the ship's entrance. Inside, Eva monitored the beacon's transmission progress. 60% complete, she reported. "We need 2 more minutes." Kalen remained connected to the ship's systems, his expression intensely focused as he continued retrieving critical historical data. "More coming," he warned, apparently able to access the facility's security feeds through the ship's interface. Eva glanced at the beacon's status again. 70%. Almost there. The security forces were adapting to their defensive strategy, attempting to flank their position from multiple angles. 2 of Kalen's warriors sustained injuries from energy weapon impacts, though none appeared life-threatening yet. 85%, Eva called out, tension evident in her voice. "Just a little longer." Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the far side of the facility. Not part of their planned diversion, but something more substantial. The shockwave temporarily disrupted Nova Corp's coordination, buying precious seconds for the transmission. What was that? Eva demanded, steadying herself against the console. Lyritha's expression showed surprise and recognition. Other captives, she explained. Those not rescued. They fight too. The transmission reached 95% completion as security forces regrouped, pressing their attack with increased determination. They were now close enough that Eva could hear their commander ordering the deployment of heavy weapons, the kind that would breach their position regardless of cover. 98%, Eva reported, preparing for emergency extraction. Almost. The beacon's indicator flashed green as the transmission completed, confirming successful delivery to Galactic Enforcement emergency channels. The evidence was out. Nova Corp's illegal operation exposed to authorities who couldn't ignore such blatant violations of galactic law. It's done, Eva announced. Time to withdraw. Kalen disengaged from the ship's interface, but not before initiating some final sequence Eva didn't recognize. The entire vessel began to pulse with increasing energy, systems activating that had lain dormant for generations. What did you do? Eva asked as they retreated toward their planned escape route. Ship protects itself now, Kalen replied cryptically. Nova Corp cannot have technology. They rejoined the defensive perimeter, where Kalen's warriors continued holding off security forces with remarkable effectiveness despite their limited numbers. The ongoing chaos from the distant explosion provided crucial distraction, preventing Nova Corp from bringing their full strength to bear. Fall back by teams, Eva directed. Maintain covering fire, but conserve ammunition. They began their withdrawal, moving in coordinated pairs toward a secondary exit Lyrith had identified during her time in captivity. Nova Corp's security pursued, but the ship's increasing energy emissions created interference with their communications and targeting systems, reducing their effectiveness. As the last team cleared the chamber, Eva glanced back at the ancestral vessel. Its activation had progressed dramatically, the entire structure now pulsing with light that seemed to be burning away centuries of accumulated soil and vegetation. Whatever Kalen had initiated was clearly more than a simple security protocol. They navigated the facility's corridors under sporadic enemy fire, moving toward the extraction point where the remaining warriors would rendezvous with them. The chaos throughout the compound worked in their favor. Nova Corps personnel were divided between responding to their intrusion, the distant explosion, and whatever was happening with the ancestral ship. They reached the extraction point, a maintenance bay with access to both ground transportation and the surrounding jungle, to find it already secured by the rest of their force. Several had sustained injuries during the diversionary attacks, but all had made it to the rendezvous. Everyone accounted for, Kalen confirmed, directing the wounded to the captured transport vehicles. As they prepared to depart, a massive energy surge emanated from the central chamber, momentarily disrupting all electronic systems in the facility. When functionality returned, Eva checked the scanner she had brought to monitor Nova Corp's response. Something's happening with the ship, she reported. Energy readings are off the charts, like nothing I've ever seen before. Kalen nodded, unsurprised. Awakening protocols. Ancient defenses. They boarded the transport vehicles just as facility-wide evacuation alarms began blaring. Nova Corps personnel were abandoning their posts, fleeing toward emergency extraction points with little regard for the intruders they had been pursuing moments before. Whatever was happening with the ship clearly presented a greater threat than Kalen's team. As their vehicles sped away from the facility, Eva looked back to see a column of brilliant energy erupting from the central chamber, piercing the retractable roof and shooting skyward in a dazzling display visible even through Viridia's dense atmosphere. "What is that?" she demanded. "What exactly did you activate?" "Beacon," Kalen replied, his expression reflecting both awe and vindication. "True beacon. Calls to others like us, still among stars. Tells them, we survive here. We need help." Eva stared at the energy column, understanding dawning. "You're not just calling for galactic enforcement intervention. You're calling to your own people, other survivors of your civilization who might still exist elsewhere in the galaxy." Kalen nodded. "Both necessary. Law protects for now, Kin protects forever. The implications were staggering. If other branches of Kalan civilization still existed with their technology intact, their arrival would significantly alter the power dynamics, not just on Viridia, but potentially throughout this sector of space. It was a tactical move Eva hadn't anticipated, and one that demonstrated just how profoundly she had underestimated both Kalan and his people's capabilities. They drove deep into the jungle, following routes only Kalan's people knew, eventually reaching a safe distance from the Novacorp facility. When they finally stopped to regroup, the energy column remained visible on the horizon, a beacon that would be detectable across interstellar distances. "How long before your transmission reaches galactic enforcement?" Kalan asked as they treated the wounded and prepared for the final journey back to the settlement. "A few hours at most," Eva replied, "and they're required by law to respond to evidence of this magnitude within 24 hours. I'd expect initial investigative forces within a day, full intervention within 3 if the evidence is verified, which it will be. And your people?" she added. "How long before they might respond to your beacon?" Kalen's expression turned contemplative. "Unknown. Depends on distance, if any survive, if they remember us." He looked toward the energy column, still pulsing against the darkening sky. "But they will come if they can. We are not forgotten species." As night fell over Viridia, they continued their journey back to the hidden settlement. The jungle seemed different somehow, more alert, more aware of the changes taking place. Eva found herself wondering if Viridia itself was somehow responding to the ancestral ship's activation, as though the planet and Kalen's people shared some deeper connection than mere habitation. They arrived at the settlement near dawn, greeted by anxious community members who had been monitoring their progress through scouts positioned along the route. Varith awaited them at the entrance, her ancient eyes immediately seeking confirmation of their success. Kalan approached her directly, speaking in their native language, but with such evident satisfaction that translation seemed unnecessary. The elder's posture shifted as she absorbed his report, straightening, strengthening, as though years of oppression were falling away with each word. When Kalan finished, Varith turned to Eva, studying her with new intensity. "You have helped change destiny of my people," she said in careful Standard Galactic, clearly words she had prepared during their absence. "How do we repay such debt?" Eva shook her head. "There's no debt. Nova Corp was my enemy too, and what they were doing here violated everything decent in galactic society." She paused, considering more personal motivations she rarely acknowledged. "And sometimes helping others is its own reward." Varith's expression suggested she understood more than Eva's words conveyed. The elder gestured toward the settlement, where preparations for some kind of ceremony were already underway. "You stay. Celebrate with us. Then decide future path." The offer hung in the air, not just an invitation to a celebration, but a suggestion of possibilities Eva hadn't considered. She glanced at Kalan, whose expression remained unreadable yet somehow expectant. "I'll stay for the celebration," Eva agreed. "As for what comes after, we'll see what options present themselves." The celebration began at sunset, a combining of victory ritual and Thanksgiving ceremony that involved the entire community. Eva observed with fascination as Kalen's people expressed their cultural identity more openly than she had yet witnessed, free from the constant threat that had constrained them for so long. There was music unlike anything in human experience, harmonics that seemed to resonate with Viridia's natural sounds rather than imposing upon them. There was dancing that mimicked both the predatory grace of their physical form and the flowing patterns of the jungle itself. And there were stories, tales of ancestors who had crossed stars, of adaptation to Viridia, of resistance against invaders who would exploit their adopted home. Throughout the evening, Eva found herself welcomed into these experiences despite her obvious differences. Children approached her with curious questions about the wider galaxy, while elders sought her perspective on what intervention might bring. She answered as honestly as she could, neither minimizing the challenges ahead nor diminishing the victory they had achieved. As the celebration continued, Kalen eventually found her observing from a quiet vantage point at the settlement's edge. He carried 2 vessels of ritual drink, a fermented nectar that tasted of sunlight and complex molecular structures Eva couldn't begin to identify. "You sit apart," he observed, offering one of the vessels. "Not comfortable with celebration?" Eva accepted the drink with a small smile. "Just processing everything. It's been quite a journey from crash landing to interstellar revolution." Kalen settled beside her, his proximity now familiar and welcome rather than cause for alert. "Journey not finished," he noted. "Many changes coming. For Viridia. For my people." He glanced at her directly. "For you. My ship is destroyed," Eva acknowledged. "And once galactic enforcement arrives, I'll have to explain what I was doing in uncharted space with an unregistered cargo. There will be consequences." "You could stay," Kalen suggested, the casualness of his tone belied by the intensity of his gaze. "Viridia needs bridge people now, those who understand both worlds." The offer wasn't entirely unexpected, yet it still caught Eva off guard. "Stay? Here." Kayla nodded. "Help transition. Teach us about galactic politics, technology. Help protect Viridia from new exploiters who will come." He paused, adding more quietly, "Be part of something good, something growing." The proposal stirred possibilities Eva had barely allowed herself to contemplate. Her life as a transport pilot had been solitary by design. Minimal attachments, no permanent connections, always ready to move to the next job. The idea of rootedness, of investment in a community's future, was both foreign and strangely compelling. And there was Kalen himself, the unexpected connection that had formed between them, transcending species differences and initial suspicion to become something neither had anticipated. That too would require exploration, understanding, patience. "I don't know if I remember how to stay in one place," Eve admitted. "It's been a long time since I had anything resembling a home." "Then learn again," Kalen suggested simply, "as we learn to rejoin Galaxy." Before Eva could respond, a commotion from the settlement center drew their attention. A scout had arrived with urgent news, and the celebration paused as Vareth received the report. Kalen listened to the rapid exchange, then turned to Eva with renewed intensity. "Galactic ships, already in orbit. Many ships." Eva frowned, checking her chronometer. "That's too fast for standard enforcement response." The transmission couldn't have been processed through normal channels this quickly. They hurried to join the gathering, where Vareth was already organizing a response to the unexpected development. Through Kalen's translation, Eva learned that multiple vessels had been detected entering Viridia's orbit. Not the typical enforcement patrol crafts, but a mixture of military vessels and what appeared to be diplomatic ships. "Someone intercepted our transmission and responded with priority resources," Eva surmised. "That suggests high-level interest in either Nova Corp's activities or your ancestral technology. Possibly both." Vareth turned to Eva, clearly recognizing her expertise in galactic matters would be crucial now. "They send message," she said. "Ask to speak with leaders of Viridia. Ask about human woman with crashed ship." Eva straightened, understanding the implications. "They're looking for me specifically. That suggests this isn't just about Nova Corp's violations." Kalen's expression darkened with concern. "Danger? I don't know," Eva admitted. "But we need to respond carefully. If we ignore the communication, they might assume hostility and take more aggressive action." After brief consultation with the settlement's leaders, a decision was reached. They would answer the communication, but establish terms for any face-to-face contact. Eva would be present, but not immediately identified, a precaution until the visitor's intentions became clear. Using equipment salvaged from the transport, they established a basic communication link with the orbiting vessels. The response was immediate, a holographic projection of a human Centauri ambassador, flanked by representatives from Galactic Enforcement and what appeared to be military advisors. "People of Viridia," the ambassador began, his tone formal but respectful. "We have received evidence of serious violations of galactic law on your world. We come with authority to investigate these claims and provide protection under indigenous rights statutes. So far, standard protocol. Eva remained out of the projection field, observing closely as Verith responded through a translator. We welcome investigation of crimes against our people and planet, the elder stated. But we question speed of response. Normal procedures take longer. The ambassador nodded acknowledgement. You are correct. Our expedited presence is due to additional factors. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. We have reason to believe Captain Eva Rostova may be on your world. Her ship was reported missing in this Sector 3 standard weeks ago, and the transmission we received bore signatures of her equipment. Verith showed no reaction to this information. What interest does galactic government have in one human pilot? Here, the ambassador glanced at his military advisors before responding. Captain Rostova's cargo is of significant importance. It contains diplomatic materials vital to ongoing negotiations between three major powers. The inability to locate these materials has created tensions. Eva felt a cold realization wash over her. The sealed cargo she had agreed to transport, the high-security delivery that had offered enough credits to retire on, was apparently far more significant than she had been told. Not unusual in her line of work, but the scale of response suggested importance beyond anything she had previously encountered. She stepped into the projection field, decision made. This is Captain Eva Rostova. I'm alive, as you can see, though my ship was destroyed in a crash. The cargo you're referring to may have survived, but it's currently in a wreckage site, potentially under Novacorp control. The ambassador's expression showed clear relief. Captain Rostova, your survival is excellent news. We are prepared to send immediate extraction for you and secure the diplomatic materials. Not so fast, Eva countered. The people of Iridia have protected me and helped expose Novacorp's illegal operations. Any intervention here needs to prioritize their rights and safety, not just the recovery of my cargo. A tense negotiation followed, with Eva leveraging the importance of the diplomatic materials to secure immediate protections for #. If you keep looking, I'll pounce. Now hurry and get the Thorn out. The screech of tearing metal announced the Wanderer's death throes as Captain Eva Rostova fought the controls. Warning lights flashed across the bridge console as the ship plummeted through Viridia's atmosphere, trailing fire and debris. Come on, you piece of junk, Eva growled, her knuckles white against the manual steering column. The unexpected asteroid collision, or was it an ambush, had crippled her engines, leaving her with barely enough thrust to guide the descent rather than simply crash. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she battled gravity and failing systems. Her military training and years as a transport pilot, the only things keeping her alive. The dense canopy of Viridia's jungle rushed up to meet her, a sea of emerald and azure foliage that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. The Wanderer's hull scraped against massive tree trunks, each impact jolting Eva against her restraints. A support beam collapsed inches from her head as the ship carved a destructive path through the jungle. With a final, bone-jarring crash, the Wanderer came to rest, half buried in vegetation and mud. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of ruptured coolant lines and the distant, unsettling calls of alien wildlife. Eva hung, suspended in her harness, blood trickling from a gash on her temple. Her ribs screamed in protest as she fumbled for the release catch. When it finally gave way, she collapsed onto the tilted deck, gasping for breath in the humid air that seeped through the fractured hull. Status report. She croaked out of habit, though there was no crew to respond. The ship's AI sputtered a fragmented reply before going silent, leaving Eva truly alone. A quick self-assessment revealed bruised ribs, the head wound, and a sprained ankle, painful but survivable. Her ship, however, was beyond salvation. The Wanderer had made her last journey. Eva limped through the wreckage, salvaging what she could: a basic medkit, her sidearm, a survival pack with water purification tablets, a multi-tool, and her personal communicator. The latter was intact, but useless without a signal booster or relay station. She needed to repair the ship's emergency beacon if she wanted any hope of rescue. Pausing at the jagged tear that now served as the wanderer's exit, Eva surveyed her surroundings. Viridia's jungle stretched in every direction. A riotous explosion of life, forms unlike anything she'd seen on developed worlds. Plants pulsed with bioluminescence, even in daylight. Massive tree trunks spiraled skyward, supporting canopies that filtered the sunlight into dappled, emerald patterns on the forest floor. The air hummed with strange, rhythmic sounds that seemed almost orchestrated. Eva had heard rumors about Viridia, an uncharted jungle planet on the fringes of mapped space, too hostile for colonization, yet too rich in unique biomes to ignore completely. Scientists occasionally mounted expeditions here, but few corporations found it worth their while to establish permanent outposts. The planet's aggressive ecosystem had a way of reclaiming any human structures within months. Perfect place for a vacation, Eva muttered, strapping her gear to her body and steeling herself. Her priority was finding high ground, to assess her situation and possibly repair the emergency beacon. The moment she stepped beyond the crashed ship, the jungle seemed to intensify around her, sounds growing louder, colors more vivid, the very air thicker with spores and moisture. Every instinct honed through years of smuggling contraband through dangerous territories screamed at her to be cautious. Eva picked her way through the undergrowth, using her survival knife to clear the more obstructive vegetation. Strange, insect-like creatures scattered at her approach, leaving iridescent trails on leaves and bark. The terrain slowly inclined, offering hope that she might find the elevated position she sought. 2 hours into her reconnaissance, Eva paused to check her portable scanner for radiation or toxic compounds. The device beeped reassuringly. The atmosphere was breathable, if humid, and showed no immediate chemical threats. She allowed herself a small sip of water, rationing carefully despite the abundant moisture around her. Experience had taught her never to trust an unfamiliar ecosystem. As she pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines to continue her climb, something snagged her arm. Eva turned to free herself from what she assumed was just another clingy plant, but the vines suddenly constricted, pulling her off balance. She stumbled backward, landing hard on the loamy soil. More vines whipped around her legs, and Eva realized too late that she'd triggered some kind of natural trap, or perhaps not so natural. The plants coiled tighter, bioluminescent thorns extending from their surfaces. Eva struggled, reaching for her knife, but every movement caused the thorns to press closer to her skin. One pierced her forearm, sending fire through her veins. She bit back a scream, refusing to attract whatever predators might be lurking nearby. The thorns emitted a faint blue glow where they contacted her skin, almost as if they were extracting something from her. That's when she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Eva froze, forcing herself to breathe evenly while scanning the shadows between the massive tree trunks. He emerged silently, like darkness taking form. A humanoid figure, tall and powerfully built, moved with predatory grace on the periphery of her vision. Eva caught glimpses of mottled, black-spotted skin that blended perfectly with the dappled shadows of the forest floor. The being circled her position, keeping a calculated distance, studying her predicament with unnerving intensity. As he stepped into a shaft of sunlight, Eva saw him clearly for the first time. He resembled a human in basic form, but with distinctly feline characteristics. Retractable claws extended from fingertips, pupils that contracted to vertical slits in the light, and a powerful, lithe musculature covered in short, black-spotted fur. He wore minimal clothing crafted from local materials, but it was clearly designed for functionality rather than modesty. Pouches for carrying tools, protective pads at joints, and a harness that supported several weapons. Those weapons gave Eva pause, though they appeared primitive at first glance. A spear with a crystalline tip, what looked like a blowgun, and various knives. She recognized the deliberate craftsmanship. These weren't crude tools, but precisely balanced instruments designed by someone who understood exactly how to hunt in this environment. The being continued to observe her, head slightly tilted, eyes never leaving her face. Eva forced herself to maintain eye contact despite her vulnerable position, a stubborn refusal to show weakness even as the thorns dug deeper. "I don't suppose you're the welcoming committee," Eva said, knowing full well he probably couldn't understand her. Her transport had a basic universal translator, but it was back in the wreckage and likely damaged beyond use. The being crouched, still maintaining distance, nostrils flaring as he seemed to scent the air. Then, to Eva's surprise, he spoke. The sounds were unlike any language she'd heard, clicks, growls, and melodic tones that seemed to harmonize with the forest itself. But there was unmistakable intelligence behind them, and unmistakable wariness. He gestured at the thorny vines, then at Eva, making a motion as if to say stop struggling. When Eva continued to try, freeing her knife hand, his expression darkened. He bared impressive canines and made a gesture that required no translation, a distinct pouncing movement, followed by a slashing motion. The message was clear enough. Keep struggling and I'll attack. Eva stilled, calculating her options. The thorns were still sending waves of discomfort through her arm, but not debilitating pain. If this local was hostile, he could have attacked while she was entrapped. The fact that he hadn't suggested other motives. Slowly, deliberately, Eva raised her free hand, palm outward, in what she hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, keeping her voice even. "Ship crashed. Just trying to survive." The being's posture shifted slightly, tension easing fractionally. He approached with fluid grace, still alert but less overtly threatening. When he was about 10 feet away, he pointed directly at Eva's eyes, then at himself, then made that pouncing gesture again. Next, he pointed at the thorns embedded in her arm and mimicked pulling something out quickly. It took Eva a moment to parse his meaning, but when she did, a bitter laugh escaped her. He was telling her to stop staring at him, that her direct gaze was provocative, but also indicating he wanted to remove the thorns from her arm. "If you keep looking, I'll pounce," she translated to herself. "But now hurry and get the thorn out." An offer of help coupled with a threat. Typical. Eva had dealt with enough dangerous contacts in her smuggling career to recognize the dynamic. He was establishing dominance while extending conditional assistance. Eva deliberately broke eye contact, looking at the ground instead. "Fine," she said. "Get these things off me, and we'll discuss next steps." The being approached cautiously, crouching beside the vines that held her. He produced a small knife with a serrated edge unlike any metal Eva recognized. With precise movements, he severed the main vine at strategic points, causing the entire structure to loosen its grip. As the vines recoiled, he deftly caught her injured arm before the movement could drive the thorn deeper. Up close, Eva could see the thorn more clearly. It wasn't just a simple spike, but a complex structure with microscopic barbs and what appeared to be a pumping mechanism at its base. The being murmured something in his language, his tone suggesting concern or possibly recognition. With unexpected gentleness that contradicted his powerful appearance, he gripped the thorn near its base and gave Eva a warning look. She nodded once, gritting her teeth. In a single, swift movement, he extracted the thorn, immediately pressing a leaf he'd plucked from his pouch against the wound. The relief was immediate, the burning sensation replaced by a cool numbness where the leaf contacted her skin. Eva exhaled slowly, studying her rescuer with new consideration. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange in this context. Gratitude wasn't something she dispensed freely, not after years of betrayals in the cutthroat transport business. "I'm Eva, Captain Eva Rostova." She placed a hand on her chest as she spoke her name, hoping the gesture would translate even if her words didn't. The being watched her carefully, then mimicked her gesture, placing a clawed hand against his chest. "Kalen," he said, the word resonating with a musical quality that Eva's human vocal cords probably couldn't replicate. Eva slowly rose to her feet, wincing as her injured ankle protested. Kalen stepped back, giving her space but remaining alert. He gestured toward the direction she'd been heading, then shook his head. Next, he pointed in a different direction, tapped his chest and made a walking motion with his fingers. The meaning seemed clear. Don't go that way. Follow me instead. Eva hesitated. Following a stranger on an unknown planet was precisely the kind of risk she'd learned to avoid. But her choices were limited. Her ankle throbbed, her arms still tingled from the thorn's effects, and she had no idea which local hazards might kill her in the next hour. Lead the way, she said finally, gesturing for him to proceed. But I'm watching you, Kalen. His lips curled in what might have been amusement, revealing those impressive fangs again. He tapped his eyes, then gestured at the surrounding forest with a sweeping motion that somehow conveyed both warning and respect. The message was clear. On Viridia, everyone and everything was watching all the time. Eva would need to adapt to survive. And so began their uneasy alliance, two predators circling each other while navigating a jungle that threatened to devour them both. Kalen moved through the forest with fluid efficiency that made Eva's careful progress seem clumsy by comparison. He chose paths invisible to her until they were upon them, avoiding hazards she only noticed after they passed. Several times he stopped abruptly, holding up a hand for silence, as unseen creatures passed nearby, their presence betrayed only by subtle movements in the undergrowth or changes in the forest's ambient sounds. Communication remained rudimentary. Eva attempted to use her portable scanner as a makeshift translator, but its linguistic database was too limited for Kalen's language. Instead, they developed a growing lexicon of gestures, simple sounds, and mime concepts. Water, food, danger, rest, the basics of survival. Eva kept her damaged emergency beacon close, working on it whenever they paused. She noticed Kalen watching her repairs with calculating interest, though whether he understood the technology or merely recognized it as important to her was unclear. As dusk approached, the forest transformed. Bioluminescence intensified, with entire tree systems lighting up in coordinated patterns. The air filled with floating spores that glowed like tiny stars, creating the illusion of walking through a galaxy. Under different circumstances, Eva might have found it beautiful. Now, she only wondered which of these dazzling life forms might kill her in her sleep. Kalen led them to a massive tree whose roots had formed a natural shelter, partially enclosed and elevated above the damp forest floor. He demonstrated how certain moss-like growths repelled the more aggressive nocturnal insects, showing Eva how to arrange them around their sleeping area. They shared an awkward meal, Eva's emergency rations supplemented by fruit Kalen harvested from specific trees. He insisted on preparing the fruit in a particular way, scraping away certain parts with his knife before deeming it safe to eat. The flavor was unexpectedly pleasant, tart and refreshing. As night fully descended, Kalen took the first watch, his eyes reflecting the bioluminescence with an eerie glow. Eva leaned against the tree trunk, her weapons within easy reach, and allowed herself to close her eyes. She didn't expect to actually sleep, not in a strange environment with an even stranger companion, but her body's need for recovery overrode her caution. She woke to Kalen's hand on her shoulder, his grip firmer than necessary. Before she could react defensively, she registered the tension in his posture. Something was wrong. He pressed a finger to his lips, a gesture he must have learned from observing her, and pointed into the darkness beyond their shelter. At first, Eva saw nothing. Then, movement caught her eye, not the organic flow of the forest creatures, but the deliberate progress of something that didn't belong. Lights flickered between the trees, too steady and directional to be natural. Artificial lights meant people, and on an uncolonized world like Viridia, that likely meant trouble. Kalen's reaction confirmed her suspicion. His muscles coiled with tension, a low growl vibrating in his throat, barely audible but unmistakably hostile. These were enemies, not potential rescuers. Eva retrieved her scanner, activating its passive electromagnetic detection mode. The readings confirmed what she feared: energy signatures from advanced tech, moving in a search pattern. Whoever they were looking for something or someone. She caught Kalen's eye and gestured at their surroundings, then at the approaching lights, raising her eyebrows in question. His response was immediate and vehement. A quick, slashing motion across his throat followed by a gesture toward the deeper forest. He wanted to retreat. Eva considered her options. If these were legitimate rescue forces responding to her ship's automated distress call, running would only delay her evacuation. But something in Kalen's reaction and her own experiences with the shadier side of interstellar commerce made her skeptical. The timing was too convenient, the approach too cautious for a standard rescue operation. Decision made. She nodded to Kalen and gathered her essentials. The beacon would have to wait. Its activation might only draw these unwelcome visitors directly to them. They slipped away from their shelter, Kalen leading them through the darkest parts of the forest where even the bioluminescence seemed subdued. Eva struggled to match his silent progress, each snapped twig or rustled leaf drawing a reproachful glance from her guide. An hour into their retreat, disaster struck. The ground beneath Eva's feet suddenly gave way, plunging her into darkness. She barely suppressed a shout as she fell, landing hard in what felt like a pit of some kind. Sharp pain lanced through her already injured ankle, and she tasted blood where she'd bitten her cheek. Above her, Kalen's silhouette appeared against the faint glow of the forest canopy. He made a series of urgent gestures that Eva couldn't fully interpret in the darkness, but his agitation was clear. The pursuers were getting closer. Eva tried to stand, but her ankle collapsed beneath her. Swallowing a curse, she fumbled for her scanner, using its dim screen to examine her surroundings. She'd fallen into some kind of natural sinkhole, not deep but steep-sided and filled with what appeared to be decomposing plant matter. The smell was overpowering. A movement from above made her freeze. Kalen was descending into the pit, using the root systems exposed in its walls with such agility that he seemed to flow rather than climb. He reached her side and assessed her injury with a quick glance, his expression grim. Eva understood the situation perfectly. She'd become a liability, injured, slower, and now trapped. In her line of work, this was typically when partners abandoned each other. Every smuggler knew the rule. Your own survival comes first. She reached for her sidearm, prepared to insist he leave her if necessary. She'd make her stand here if it came to that. Instead, Kalen surprised her. He crouched, gesturing for Eva to climb onto his back. When she hesitated, he made an impatient sound, pointing urgently in the direction of their pursuers. The situation left no room for pride. Eva holstered her weapon and allowed Kalen to position her on his back, her arms around his neck, legs gripping his waist. His strength was immediately apparent. He carried her weight as though it were negligible, scaling the pit wall using only one arm and his powerful legs. Once clear of the pit, he didn't set her down, but continued moving through the forest at a pace that seemed impossible given his burden. Eva clung tightly, marveling at the raw power in his body, the efficiency of his movement. This was an apex predator in his natural environment, and she was suddenly, intensely grateful that he'd chosen to help rather than hunt her. They traveled this way until dawn began to lighten the sky, putting significant distance between themselves and their pursuers. Finally, Kalen slowed, approaching a small stream with a rocky bank. He lowered Eva carefully to a flat stone and immediately began examining her ankle. The injury had worsened with the fall. Swelling distorted her boot, and she couldn't suppress a hiss of pain when Kalen gently probed the joint. He frowned, glancing from the ankle to Eva's face with an expression that needed no translation. This was bad. Eva reached for her medkit, extracting a compression bandage and pain relievers. She'd dealt with worse injuries in the field before. But before she could apply the bandage, Kalen placed a restraining hand on her arm. He pointed to her modern medical supplies, shook his head, then gestured to the surrounding forest and then to her ankle. "You want to use local remedies?" Eva asked, skeptical but curious. Kalen moved to the stream edge, selecting specific plants growing near the water. With methodical precision, he crushed some leaves between his palms, added water to create a paste, then returned to Eva's side. He held the mixture near her face, clearly wanting her to examine it before he applied it. Eva's scanner confirmed what Kaelin seemed to be indicating. The plant compound contained natural anti-inflammatories and analgesics, similar to some pharmaceutical compounds, but in their raw form. More importantly, it showed no toxic components harmful to human biology. She nodded her consent, watching as he applied the paste to her ankle with the same gentle precision he'd shown when removing the thorn. The effect was almost immediate, a cooling sensation that penetrated deep into the joint, numbing the worst of the pain. As he worked, Eva studied him with new appreciation. "You've done this before," she said. "Treated injuries like mine." Kaelin glanced up, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he pulled aside the simple leather armor protecting his shoulder, revealing a puckered scar that could only have come from an energy weapon, similar to those used by corporate security forces throughout the galaxy. Eva's eyes widened. "You've encountered off-worlders before." "Recently." He nodded once, his jaw tightening as he recovered the scar, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that transcended their language barrier. There was history here, and it wasn't pleasant. Eva reached for her portable scanner, pulling up the electromagnetic readings from the previous night. She showed Kaelin the display, pointing to the energy signatures, then made a questioning gesture. His reaction was immediate and visceral, a baring of fangs, a low growl that seemed to rumble from deep in his chest. He pointed at the scanner, then drew a finger across his throat in that now familiar gesture. "Enemies. Dangerous ones." Eva nodded, her suspicions confirmed. These weren't random poachers or even standard corporate scouts. The energy signatures were too sophisticated, their search patterns too precise. Someone had come looking specifically for her ship or its cargo. She hesitated, then made a decision. Pulling out the emergency beacon, she held it where Kaelin could see it clearly. She pointed to it, then to the sky, mimicking a ship descending. Next, she pointed to the scanner readings, then made the throat-cutting gesture Kaelin had used. Finally, she pointed to the beacon again, raised her eyebrows, and tilted her head in question. It was a complex concept to convey through gestures. Would activating this beacon bring help, or would it bring more of the same enemies? Kaelin studied the beacon, then looked at Eva for a long moment. His expression shifted, displaying an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Finally, he reached out and gently pushed the beacon back toward her pack, shaking his head. The message was clear enough. Don't activate it. Not yet. Eva nodded slowly, returning the beacon to her pack. She wasn't entirely surprised. If these pursuers were monitoring standard emergency channels, and they likely were if they had detected her crash, then the beacon would lead them straight to her position. What did surprise her was the realization that she trusted Kaelin's judgment. Somewhere in the past 12 hours, between the Thorn extraction and being carried through a hostile jungle, Eva had begun to rely on this alien being more than she'd relied on anyone in years. It was unsettling, necessary for survival, perhaps, but unsettling nonetheless. As if sensing her discomfort, Kaelin moved back slightly, giving her space. He gestured to the stream, miming drinking and bathing, then pointed to the dense forest canopy overhead, secure from aerial surveillance, at least temporarily. A safe place to rest and recover. Eva nodded her agreement, and they set about establishing a more comfortable camp than the previous night's hasty shelter. Kaelin constructed a lean-to using fallen branches and broad leaves, positioning it to blend naturally with the surrounding vegetation. Eva sorted through her supplies, taking inventory of what remained and calculating how long she could survive without resupply. The answer wasn't encouraging. 3 days of emergency rations, assuming minimal activity. Water wasn't an issue with the stream and her purification tablets, but food would become critical soon. Her gaze drifted to Kaelin, who was fashioning what appeared to be fishing spears from straight branches and shards of crystalline material from his pouches. He caught her watching and held up one of the completed spears, offering it to her with a gesture toward the deeper pools downstream. Eva took the spear, feeling its perfect balance with appreciation. A tool designed with expertise. "Thank you," she said, the words still awkward but increasingly genuine. "For everything. I wouldn't have survived the night without you." Kalen's head tilted slightly, as though he were processing her tone more than her words. After a moment, he placed his hand lightly on his chest, then extended it toward her, a gesture Eva interpreted as acceptance or perhaps reciprocity. They spent the afternoon securing their position and gathering food. Eva downstream with her spear, Kalen upstream with his more advanced techniques. By evening, they had assembled a respectable meal of fish and edible plants that Kalen identified. They ate in comparative comfort, the pain in Eva's ankle reduced to a dull throb thanks to a second application of the medicinal paste. As darkness fell and the forest's bioluminescence created their now familiar nightscape, Eva found herself studying Kalen openly. His movements as he maintained their small fire, his constant awareness of their surroundings, the careful way he arranged his weapons within easy reach, all spoke of someone accustomed to survival in hostile conditions. Not so different from herself. Really, though her battlegrounds have been space stations and corporate territories rather than untamed wilderness. We're not so different, you and I, she said quietly, knowing he wouldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might convey something. Survivors. Adapters. Kalen looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. This time, she didn't look away, and neither did he. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of their shared circumstances. His response, when it came, startled her. He spoke a single word in his language, but with deliberate care, as though trying to make himself understood. Eva. Her name, in his voice, sounded different, more musical, with tonal qualities her human ears could barely distinguish. But it was unmistakably her name. Eva smiled, a genuine expression that felt strange on her face after the stress of the past 2 days. Kalen, she responded, doing her best to match the musical quality of his pronunciation. A flicker of what might have been amusement crossed his features, but he nodded in approval. It was a small triumph in communication, but it felt significant. A beginning. As Eva settled into her sleeping position, her weapons arranged precisely as they had been the previous night, she realized something had changed. She still kept her sidearm within reach, still positioned herself to react quickly if needed, but she was no longer expecting Kalen himself to be the threat. Somewhere between the thorn and the ankle and being carried through a dangerous jungle, Eva Rostova, who trusted no one, had begun to trust the alien warrior who called himself Kalen. The realization should have been more alarming than it was. Dawn broke with a downpour. Not the gentle rain Eva might have experienced on more temperate planets, but sheets of water that transformed the forest floor into rivulets and pools within minutes. Kalen acted quickly, adjusting their shelter to better deflect the deluge and showing Eva which plants to avoid as certain species unfurled toxic defenses when saturated. They huddled in their lean-to, watching as the forest's inhabitants responded to the rain in various ways. Some emerging to drink, others retreating deeper into cover. Eva's scanner registered subtle shifts in atmospheric composition. The rainfall was releasing compounds from the canopy that temporarily altered the breathable air. Kalen seemed unconcerned, so Eva followed his lead, using the enforced rest period to continue working on her emergency beacon. The circuitry had been damaged in her flight from the ship, but with careful soldering and a bit of improvisation, she might be able to restore basic functionality. As she worked, she noticed Kalen watching with that same calculating interest he'd shown before. This time, he moved closer, crouching beside her to observe her hands as they manipulated the delicate components. Repair, Eva said, pointing to the beacon, then making a broken motion with her hands followed by a gesture of fixing. Repair. Kalen repeated the word, his pronunciation adding tonal qualities Eva couldn't replicate. Then he reached into one of his pouches and extracted a small object, holding it out to her. Eva hesitated before accepting it, her natural caution still active despite their growing trust. The object was a technological component unlike anything she'd seen in standard commerce. A crystalline structure with embedded circuitry that seemed to pulse with its own energy source. It was clearly advanced tech, but not of human or known alien manufacture. "What is this?" Eva asked, forgetting momentarily that Kalen couldn't understand her question. "Where did you get advanced technology like this?" Kalen pointed to the beacon, then to the component, then made the fixing gesture Eva had just taught him. He wanted her to use it for repairs. Eva examined the component more carefully, scanning it with her device. The readings were remarkable. The crystal generated a stable energy field that could potentially amplify the beacon's signal far beyond its original capacity. But incorporating alien tech into her own equipment was risky. Compatibility issues could fry both devices. Still, if it worked, she looked up at Kalen, who watched her with those intense predator's eyes. "Why help me like this?" she asked, knowing he wouldn't understand the words, but hoping the question in her tone would translate. Kalen's response surprised her. He drew a rough map in the dirt floor of their shelter, a circle representing their current position, and a larger shape that Eva recognized as approximating the topography they'd crossed since her crash. Then he added new elements, smaller circles arranged in a pattern, connected by lines. A settlement or network of some kind. He pointed to one of these circles, then to himself. Next, he indicated several other circles and made a gesture encompassing himself and then extending outward. His people, Eva assumed. Finally, he pointed to the readings on her scanner from the previous night, the energy signatures of their pursuers, and drew a line cutting through the settlement pattern. He finished by making the now familiar throat-cutting gesture, his expression grim. The message became clear. These intruders threatened Kalen's people. Eva's crash and the pursuer's subsequent arrival were connected in ways that impacted his community. "They're a threat to your home," Eva said, nodding to show understanding. "And you think I can help somehow?" Kalen pointed to the beacon, then to the sky, then to Eva herself. He made a series of gestures that Eva interpreted, after some consideration, as conveying the concept of allies or reinforcements. "You think I can call and help against these people?" Eva translated aloud. "That I have connections who would intervene." It was a reasonable assumption, given her ship and equipment. What Kalen couldn't know was that Eva's connections in the transport business were more likely to side with whoever was paying the most, rather than rushing to her rescue out of loyalty. Still, she had a few contacts who owed her favors, people who might respond to the right incentive. And if the cargo these pursuers were likely after was as valuable as she suspected, there could be significant profit in protecting it from unauthorized acquisition. Eva looked from the component in her hand to Kalen's expectant face. She made her decision, nodding firmly. "I'll help you," she said, knowing the words meant nothing to him, but the tone and gesture would convey her commitment. "Partners." She extended her hand, palm upward, a universal offering of alliance rather than the traditional human handshake, which might be misinterpreted by someone unfamiliar with the custom. Kalen studied her hand for a moment, then slowly placed his own palm against hers. His skin was warmer than human normal, the pads of his fingers slightly textured. He curled his fingers gently around her hand, careful of his retractable claws, and repeated, "Partners." The word in his voice carried those extra tonal qualities, but it was unmistakably the standard galactic term. Eva's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You understand more than you've been letting on," she said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Kalen's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. He released her hand and tapped his ear, then pointed to her, mimicking speech. Next, he pointed to himself and made a listening gesture, followed by tapping his temple. The meaning was clear enough. He had been learning from listening to her, picking up words and concepts, which meant he likely understood more of what she'd been saying than she'd realized. Eva wasn't sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. She settled for a grudging nod of acknowledgement, then returned her attention to the beacon, integrating the crystalline component with careful adjustments. The rain continued throughout the morning, finally tapering off as midday approached. By then, Eva had successfully incorporated Kalen's strange technology into her beacon. The device hummed with new energy, its signal strength multiplied far beyond factory specifications. "It's ready," she told Kalen, holding up the modified beacon. "But we need to be strategic about activation. Once this signal goes out, Both our potential rescuers and those pursuers will know exactly where to find us. Kalen nodded, pointing to the crude map he'd drawn earlier. He indicated a position some distance from both their current location and the settlement pattern he'd identified as his home. A neutral ground for confrontation, Eva surmised. Smart, she agreed. We'll need defensible terrain, emergency extraction routes. She glanced at her injured ankle, which had improved significantly with Kalen's treatment, but would still slow her in a combat situation. And I'll need to be at full capacity before we make our move. Kalen seemed to understand her concern. He pointed to her ankle, then held up 3 fingers, followed by a sleeping gesture. 3 days of rest before they proceeded, he was suggesting. Eva considered the timeline. 3 days would allow her injury to heal further and give her time to formulate a more detailed plan. It would also give their pursuers more opportunity to widen their search pattern, potentially spreading their forces thinner across Viridia's vast jungle terrain. 3 days, she agreed. But we should move from this location. We've been here too long already. Kalen immediately began gathering their supplies, dismantling the shelter with such efficiency that within minutes, barely a trace remained of their occupation. Eva shouldered her pack, testing her ankle's strength. The pain was manageable, especially with the remnants of Kalen's medicinal paste still working through her system. They traveled more slowly than the previous day, with Eva moving under her own power rather than being carried. Kalen adjusted his pace to accommodate her limitations, occasionally scouting ahead, but always returning to ensure she navigated the trickier terrain safely. By late afternoon, they reached a new location, a series of interconnected caves set into a hillside, partially concealed by dense vegetation. The entrance was narrow enough to defend easily, and the interior chambers offered multiple escape routes according to Kalen's gestures. Inside, the cave system proved more hospitable than Eva expected. Underground springs provided fresh water, and certain cave-dwelling plants emitted enough bioluminescence to create soft, ambient lighting. Most importantly, the rock walls would shield them from most scanning technologies their pursuers might employ. Perfect, Eva said, surveying their new shelter. Defensible, hidden, sustainable. Kalen nodded in agreement. He set about establishing their base camp with practiced efficiency, creating sleeping areas, setting up subtle alarm systems at the cave entrances, identifying which interior water sources were safe to drink from. Eva contributed what she could despite her injury, organizing their supplies and continuing to fine-tune the modified beacon. As evening approached, Kalen left briefly to hunt. He returned with several small, rabbit-like creatures and an assortment of edible fungi that grew on the cave walls. They prepared the meal together, their movements becoming increasingly coordinated despite their different backgrounds and biology. The contrast wasn't lost on Eva, a human smuggler and an alien warrior, working in tandem as though they'd been partners for years rather than days. Over their meal, Eva decided to attempt more complex communication. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture of something flying, crashing. Next, she mimicked carrying something valuable, then pointed in the direction their pursuers had come from. I was transporting something, she explained, knowing Kalen was absorbing at least some of her words. Something valuable. I think that's what they're after, not just me. Kalen tilted his head, considering. He pointed to Eva's ship, mimicked the crash, then made a circular motion with his finger before pointing to his own chest. Not first time, he said, the words careful and heavily accented, but unmistakable in standard galactic. Eva's eyes widened. You've seen other crashes here? Other ships like mine? Kalen nodded. He held up 2 fingers, then 3, then made a broader gesture, suggesting many. Many ships, he said. Many outsiders. He pointed in the direction of his settlement, then made gestures imitating fighting, destruction. They harm your people, Eva surmised. These outsiders who come in ships. Kalen's expression darkened. Take land. Take people. He touched the scar on his shoulder meaningfully. Take everything. Eva absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. Viridia's remote location and uncolonized status made it perfect for illegal operations, harvesting rare biological compounds, perhaps, or mining resources outside of regulatory oversight. If corporations were running unauthorized operations here, they'd want to eliminate evidence of their presence, including downed transport ships and their pilots. The people chasing us, Eva said slowly, they're not just after my cargo. They want to eliminate witnesses. They don't want anyone knowing they're operating on Viridia. Kalen watched her face carefully as she worked through this realization. He reached into one of his pouches and extracted something that confirmed Eva's suspicions, a corporate security badge, scratched and weathered but still recognizable. The logo belonged to NovaCorp Interstellar, one of the largest and most ruthless resource extraction companies in the galaxy. NovaCorp, Eva breathed, taking the badge. Of course, they've been rumored to have black operations on uncharted worlds, but no one's ever proven it. She looked up at Kalen. They've been attacking your people? Taking them. Workers, Kalen said grimly. Experiments. The word sent a chill through Eva. NovaCorp's ethical violations were legendary in the transport business. Whispered stories of illegal genetic modifications, forced labor camps, environmental devastation on a planetary scale. If they had established a secret operation on Viridia, the indigenous population would be considered either an obstacle to be removed or a resource to be exploited. How many of your people have they taken? Eva asked, gesturing to convey the question. Kalen held up his hands, fingers spread, then closed and reopened them several times. Dozens, possibly hundreds. And you've been fighting back, Eva guessed. That's why you know their technology, why you have these components. She touched the modified beacon. You've been salvaging their equipment, learning their weaknesses. Kalen nodded, a fierce pride evident in his posture. My task, learn enemies, find weakness. Eva's respect for him deepened. He wasn't just a skilled hunter. He was a resistance fighter, an intelligence gatherer for his people. His decision to help her hadn't been random kindness. He'd recognized an opportunity to gain an ally against a common enemy. That's why you didn't kill me when you found me, Eva said, the realization dawning. You saw my ship wasn't NovaCorp. You knew I might be useful. Kalen's expression shifted to something more complex. Not quite guilt, but acknowledgement of her accuracy. Yes, he admitted. First thought, use you. Now, he hesitated, seemingly searching for words or concepts beyond his limited standard galactic vocabulary. Now, what? Eva prompted. He placed his hand on his chest, then extended it toward her, repeating the gesture they had shared earlier. Partners, he said simply. The word carried more weight than before. Not just temporary allies of convenience, but something more substantive. Eva studied him, searching for deception and finding none. Whatever his initial motivations, Kalen's commitment now seemed genuine. Partners, she agreed, returning the gesture. Against NovaCorp. With that understanding established, they turned to planning. Using sticks to draw in the dirt floor of the cave, they mapped out what they knew of NovaCorp's presence on Viridia. Kalen identified 3 primary facilities. A processing plant where biological samples were converted into exportable compounds, a mining operation extracting rare minerals from deep within Viridia's crust, and what appeared to be a research station where the experiments he had mentioned took place. Based on the movements of their pursuers, Eva suspected they were based at the research facility, which Kalen indicated was closest to their current position. If they could infiltrate that facility, they might be able to disrupt NovaCorp's entire operation and potentially free any captives being held there. We can't take on entire corporate security force directly, Eva cautioned. We need to be strategic, create confusion, divide their attention. Kalen nodded in agreement. He pointed to the modified beacon, then to various positions around the research facility on their crude map. Distractions, Eva translated. We placed the beacon away from our actual target, activated to draw their forces there, then strike at the facility while it's undermanned. It was a solid basic strategy, but Eva knew they would need more. We need intelligence, current security protocols, guard rotations, access points. And we need more firepower than my sidearm and your spears, no matter how effective those might be in the jungle. Kalen seemed to have anticipated this concern. He moved to the far corner of the cave, shifting aside a carefully arranged pile of stones to reveal a hidden cache. Inside were weapons and equipment clearly salvaged from previous encounters with NovaCorp. Energy pistols similar to Eva's, communication devices, and what appeared to be security access cards. "You've been planning this for some time," Eva observed, impressed by Kalen's foresight. He nodded, a grim determination evident in his posture. "Many seasons. Waiting. Learning." He met her eyes directly. "Now time." Eva couldn't argue with his assessment. With NovaCorp actively hunting her, and with the evidence of their illegal operation now confirmed, she had every reason to help dismantle their presence on Viridia. If she could manage to retrieve her cargo in the process, well, that would be a bonus. Assuming it had survived the crash. 3 days, she reminded him, pointing to her ankle. "We heal, we plan, we prepare. Then we move." Kalen nodded his agreement, and they spent the remainder of the evening examining the salvaged equipment, testing what still functioned and discarding what didn't. By the time they settled for sleep, they had assembled a respectable arsenal and the beginnings of a tactical approach. As Eva arranged her sleeping area, positioning herself where she could observe both Kalen and the cave entrance, she reflected on the rapid evolution of their relationship. From mutual suspicion to cautious alliance to genuine partnership in the space of just 3 days. It was unprecedented in her experience. Eva Rostova didn't form connections easily or quickly, not after years of betrayals in the cutthroat transport business. Yet here, she was placing her life in the hands of a being she couldn't even properly communicate with. More surprisingly, she found herself not just accepting his help, but actively integrating his knowledge and skills into her own survival strategies. They were becoming a team in the truest sense, complementary abilities merging to create something more effective than either could achieve alone. She watched as Kalen performed what appeared to be a pre-sleep ritual, a series of precise movements that might have been stretching exercises or perhaps something with cultural significance. His powerful form moved with that same controlled grace she'd observed from the beginning, the bioluminescence of the cave plants highlighting the spotted patterns of his fur. Objectively, he was an impressive being. Subjectively, and Eva wasn't quite ready to examine this thought too closely. She was beginning to find his presence reassuring rather than threatening, even attractive in its alien way. Eva pushed that thought aside firmly. Survival came first. Planning their strike against NovaCorp came second. Everything else was a distraction she couldn't afford. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, her last conscious awareness was of Kalen settling into his position near the cave entrance, his vigilant presence standing between her and whatever dangers Viridia might hold. For the first time since her crash, Eva slept deeply and without fear. The 3 days of preparation passed with increasing intensity. Eva's ankle improved steadily under Kalen's continued treatment, while their plans grew more refined with each discussion. Communication between them developed rapidly, Kalen's grasp of Standard Galactic expanding through Eva's deliberate teaching, while she began to recognize patterns and meanings in his native language. On the morning of the 4th day, Eva tested her weight on her injured ankle and found only minimal discomfort. "I'm ready," she announced. "Today we move against NovaCorp." Kalen nodded, already loading the salvaged weapons into carriers he had fashioned from local materials. His expression was focused, resolute, a warrior preparing for battle. Their plan had 3 phases. First, they would position the modified beacon at a location several kilometers from the research facility, setting it to activate on a timer. When NovaCorp security forces responded to the emergency signal, Eva and